Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, the topic of my presentation is the Croatian agrarian movement in Draž And Gajić, 1897 to 1898 years. For more than a century, the agrarian movement of Croats, Šokac, in southern East Baranja has been mentioned as one of the most important events in the history of Hungarian social democracy. It broke out in Draž in January 1898 and covered a 26 settlement in Brandenburg in Hungarian language Baranja Vár, Mohacs, and Siklos districts. Croats made up most residents in this settlement, Brandenburg, Draž, in Hungarian language Darázs, Dubosevica, Dályok, Gajić, Márok, Kásad, Lúcs, Lőcs, Mártince, Felső-Szent Márton, Baranska Petrova Selo, Petárda, Topolye, Izsép, and Torjánci, Torjánc. And among the agitators, Croats were in the majority, along with a significant part of Hungarians and a considerable number of Germans. Although in the literature this movement of the impoverished local population was portrayed as a Šokac national movement, it only carried socialist ideology but without a national sign. The movement was directly managed from the center of the Social Democratic Party, founded in 1890 in Budapest. The labor movement in Baranja was equally part of the movement led by the Hungarian Social Democratic Party, just like the one led by the Social Democratic Party of Croatian Slavonia, founded in 1894 and had a large number of supporters in Slavonia, especially among workers of German nationality. When the Social Democrats organized strikes in Slavonia in 1897, they also spread to the area across the Drava, especially in the settlement near Karašica, where mostly Croats or Šokac lived, but they were also successful in villages with German workers. Given that, of course, Hungarians also lived in all these places, they were also participants in the struggle for workers' rights. The center of the agrarian movement was the Drava Triangle, the area between the Drava and the Danube, which is today Croatian Baranja. The peasants there engaged in pig breeding, dairying, and viticulture on their small estates, which at the end of the 19th century and the introduction of a new livestock production methodology were no longer competitive with the agricultural production that took place on the neighboring estates. Larger dairies no longer needed farmers who only had 1 or 2 cows each, so they were completely pushed out of the milk market, where they used to generate very important income. Croats, Germans, Hungarians and Serbs in the southern districts, Mohacs, Darda, Siklos, were burdened by the same problems: frequent floods, animal diseases, phylloxera, and hunger, especially at the beginning of the last decade of the 19th century. At the time, there were completely destroyed vineyards on the Baranja Mountains in the municipality of Draž And Gajić, which once fed local families. Since 1891, their meadows and pastures were constantly flooded, so Draž, Gajić, Topolje, Dubosevica, Branjina, Popovac, and further east, Lúcs and Benga, that is Lug and Vardarac, were forced to lease pastures because without them it was impossible to keep that kind of livestock. The local smallholders were in debt, and in 1897 to 1898, due to the flood in Draž and Gajić, they were left without any crops and income. That year, swine erysipelas caused a complete death of pigs in Gajić and Baranja, and the locals were threatened with starvation. Many lost their houses and possessions, forcing them to work as wage laborers on large estates. At the end of 1897, the socialist agitation in these villages was a great success. Party organizations were founded in the villages of Šokac and Baranja, and socialist agitation from Croatia and Bačka became undisguised. The agitators urged them to resist the church, pay taxes to state, and give to the church. The distance of the Baranja's peasants from the church is connected with the emergence of the Nazarene sect, which spread from Switzerland to Hungary in the second half of the 19th century, mainly among the peasantry and workers. The first Nazarenes appeared in Zmajevac, in Hungarian language Vörösmart, and then gained supporters in other settlements in Drava Triangle. Socialist agitations and Nazarenism led to the abandonment of the Catholic as well as the Protestant Church, but of course this mostly happened to avoid paying the church tax. At the turn of the 19th and 20th century, there were about 4,000 Nazarenes in southern Baranja, and in 1914 there were 9,000 in the county. The public and the press were extremely opposed to socialist and social democratic ideas, as well as to the Nazarenes. Newspapers certainly helped in the fact that the agrarian movement in Baranja was declared a Šokac movement, and Nazarenism began to be portrayed as some kind of Šokac sect. At the same time, it was kept quiet that it resonated among the Hungarians as well, indeed that it was spread among the Šokci precisely through the Hungarians. The rebellion, which broke out in January 1898, with its seats in Draž and Gajić, had as its objectives the reduction of land taxes, a significant increase in wages, and the abolition of church taxes. The radical demands emphasized that there is no longer a need for priests and teachers, as well as that the original goal, fragmentation of large estates, should be replaced by equal division of land. In newspapers' articles and reports of the authorities, the ideology from Draž was somewhat underestimated, especially towards its leaders, the poorly educated peasants who revolted the people against the priest, the village teacher, and representatives of the local government, that is, the village intelligentsia. In Lug, the teacher was declared a traitor to the people, and in Kashad was assassinated against Mihai Kovačević. They shot at him because, as a postman, in addition to his work as a teacher, he repeatedly reported locals who received packages from the Budapest socialist newspaper Népszava. These people were arrested and fined. The anti-church character of the labor movement is evidenced by the practice introduced in the summer of 1898, when even those Christians who remained under the auspices of the Catholic or Protestant Church no longer allowed their children to be baptized. The noble judge, Judex Nobiles, informed even the bishop about this, explaining that the Šokac do not want the priest to benefit materially from it. This practice was especially common among Croats in Draž, Gajić, and Podolje, and among Protestant Hungarians in Zmajevac, Berešmart. The Act on Freedom of Religion and the Act on State Registers contributed to this. The peak of the rebellion took place in January 1898. In the reports of the noble judge, it is stated that the relations between the pastor of Gajić, Stevo Jakić, and the people were damaged and that the Šokacs were alienated from the church. In the report of January 16, 1898, it is said that even the gendarmerie is no longer able to control the situation. At the time, gendarmes were called to intervene almost every day and mostly managed to break the protests. However, that Sunday, around 600 socialists from the village, but also from Draž, Topolje, Duboševica, Podolje, Branjina, and Zmajevac, gathered in Gajić near the church tower. That's how the Šokac rebellion began. The authorities were alarmed by the possibility that the gathering would perform some sacrilege, so 7 gendarmes were called. The gathered dissidents, armed with sticks and poles, surrounded them, so the gendarmes with drawn bayonets and rifles had to retreat. Notary Ferenc Cebe states in the report that there no one can be guaranteed personal safety anymore, and that among the disaffected was a 70-year-old Šokac man armed with a pitchfork. These events caused great dissatisfaction among most of the people of Baranja and the inhabitants of Hungary, the same as with authorities and newspapers. Journalists emphasized the anti-Hungarian character of the Šokac rebellion and the inability of the gendarmes to restore order in South Baranja, which is why it is necessary to engage the army. They also scared the people with the fact that the Šokacs were planning to divide the parceled estates of Archduke Friedrich among themselves. One of the biggest strikes broke out precisely in that economy. It was attended by hundreds of workers who suspended work at the instigation of the socialists from Draž. In order to break the strike, the great prefect sent 300 soldiers there who suppressed the protest. During the rebellion, the people of Baranja were left without the support of the Hungarian social democratic leaders. They believed that the Šokacs were looking for 2 radical changes: agrarian reform, and that is why their rebellion was suppressed by military intervention. That's why they invited them to continue fighting for their rights, but with milder means. In the newspapers Munkash Worker, on June 5, 1898, they invited them to refuse to sign harvest contract. Consequences. In contrast to the local authorities who saw the solution to the Baranja problem in law enforcement and the use of force, the county authorities believed that work should be done to improve living conditions. After repeated submissions, Minister of Agriculture, Doranyi, finally sent engineers and workers to Baranja, who carried out all the necessary preparatory work on the regulation of Karašica, which was finally implemented and living conditions were significantly improved. Another burning problem was the attitude of the locals toward the church. The bishop did not want to make concessions to the rebel socialists, but he eased the situation by becoming a retired priest in Draž. An administrator, a German by nationality, was appointed in his place. In terms of state law, a major change occurred when Baranja was occupied by the Serbian army in November 1980. Although Baranja was of secondary importance to the Belgrade delegations, at the peace conference in Paris, the idea of annexing a part of Baranja County on the Mohacs-Villány-Siklós line was projected very quickly. The so-called Serbian population census in 1990 aims to show that in the southern part of the historic Baranja County, the South Slavs have the majority, but to get the support of the local Germans for joining the kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes. The Šokac were considered good Hungarians until the end of the 19th century, but their rebellion made their loyalty somewhat questionable. Knowing the sensitivity of the Šokac Croats towards the agrarian issue, the commissioners of the Belgrade government assured the people of Baranja that in the new state they would achieve agrarian reform and land division and solve the problems of the local peasants. The fact that they succeeded in this is also evidenced by the minutes of the session of Šokac and Serbs from Baranja, held in Peć on July 11-20, 1990, on the birthday celebration of King Peter I. As the report from that meeting states, it was essentially a session for the accession of Baranja to Yugoslavia. Milan J. Ćosić, the educational supervisor in occupied Baranja, also wrote about winning the Croats from Baranja over to his side on July 1st, 1990. In the report on the situation in Baranja sent to the Minister of Defense, General Stevan Hadžić, it is written that the Šokci choose as because they are flesh from our flesh and blood from our blood. The supervisor is the author of the dubious names of Baranja settlements, which are still used today, and he did this with the aim of Baranja belonging to Serbia. However, this did not happen in 1945. At the plenary session of the main People's Liberation Committee of Vojvodina, held on April 6, 1945 in Novi Sad, the opinion was accepted that Vojvodina should become part of the federal unit of Serbia and that the issue of Baranja remains open as long as the people there themselves they don't decide about their affiliation. On the other hand, the government of Federal Croatia drew up an elaboration entitled on the delimitation of Vojvodina, in which it was proposed that Baranja should belong to Croatia and that the northwest of Bačka, the area from Subotica to Sombor, should remain within the Vojvodina. On June 19, 1945, the presidency of Avnoj appointed a commission to determine the border between Vojvodina and Croatia, under the chairmanship of Milovan Đilas, Minister for Montenegro, under the federal government. So this body was named Gilas Commissions after him. That commission assigned Baranja to Croatia. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for the presentation of following speakers.